Welcome back to Obsession Engineering in the next instalment of the RS660 Super Twin build. We have an exhaust system fitted to the bike, so the next thing we need to do is put the right amount of fuel in. And for that, we're going to have a secondary module, a bit like a Power Commander, but better.
We're going to be fitting a Rapidbike Racing module. And for clarity, we are not getting sponsored by Rapidbike, we've actually bought this with our own money.
A sensible man would have fitted the Jetprime eliminators that I've tucked under here and the Rapidbike module at the same time, but I didn't because I was sort of all excitable at the time. So what I need to do is just buzz the top of the airbox off, which is all these screws around here, and then I can dive inside, and the bolts that hold the trumpets into the throttle bodies actually hold the bottom of the airbox on, and then there's screws at the back here that hold the ECU in place. So I just need to undo all of that and lift the airbox out of the way. So I have the instructions for fitting the Rapidbike module and the wiring, and I thought it was going to be very, very basic when I started it, and the first option was turn off the engine, which I was kind of hoping would be fairly obvious, and then remove the seat, fuel tank and side fairings. But then it moved straight on to connecting up the injectors without even mentioning removing of the airbox, so they're not that basic after all. So I think what we can do with that is store them on the floor, and what we need to do next is look down at the injectors, because the wires that go into the injectors here and here have part of the wiring loom going to them, and then the lander probes from the exhaust headers, which are down here, they have wiring going to them, and then we have to tap into a throttle position wire that goes off the throttle body connector, which is under there somewhere. So there's not too many connectors to do, but a couple of them are slightly awkward to get to. The next connector I need to get to is the crank sensor, which comes out the left-hand side engine cover with the alternator and sits above the crankcases. And it's underneath the ECU normally, so what I've done is taken the ECU and its holder out of the way because it makes it much easier, and then I've routed my wiring sort of down behind the wiring loom on that side and underneath the throttle bodies down to here. So again, failed to mention in the instructions, remove the ECU, but it is considerably easier if you do. The next slightly awkward connector is this one that sits on the bottom of the throttle body. It sort of sits right under there, so trying to get that off with the ECU in place would have been particularly awkward. And what I need to do is tap into the yellow wire just here with the black line on it to connect up our throttle position sensor signal. Now, Rapidbike supply a posi tap thing, basically a thing you screw together and it just sort of pushes a little pin into here and just should pick up the signal. I don't like them much, so what I'm going to do is just trim a little bit the cover back, and I'm going to solder the wires together solid and then tape over everything, because I think it's a bit more permanent. So that's my plan. Right, so you can see here I've just soldered the green wire to our black and yellow wire, so that's nice and secure. But what I'm going to do now is tape over these two wires so they're sort of separate to everything else, and then tape all of it together, so from about here it's all taped together so it's nice and sturdy. Right, so I've reconnected the throttle position sensor bits to the throttle body cable, so that's all tucked down there, and the sort of aftermarket loom bit for the Rapidbike sits next to the actual wiring loom, so that's nicely tucked away. These are the ones down here that are for the crank pickup, so that's going alright. And if I go around the other side of the bike to the front, the lander probes, which are here and just behind this frame rail here, they're now connected as well, so they're all happy days. There is quite a lot of wiring involved in this, and then I've cable tied some wiring out the way here, tied the rest of it into the normal wiring loom down there, because we want to make sure nothing's going to get near the fan, and when we put the airbox on, nothing's going to get crushed, because that would be no good at all. So we're looking pretty tidy back there. So I can put the ECU and the airbox back on now. Right, I've got the airbox and the ECU and bits back on. The more you take a bike apart and put it back together, obviously the easier it gets because you get used to where everything goes, so that wasn't too bad to do. And then we've just got a bit of wiring routing down here that I'll tidy up a little bit, and Rapidbike say that you put the module sort of on top of the battery, but we're not going to put it there. We're trying to get ours as far back as possible because our TT tank will actually come back sort of up here somewhere, so we can't have the module under there because it's going to cost us fuel capacity. So the idea is to have it up here, so I've just got a neaten up a little of the wiring, tie that over there so it's actually tied to the frame rail so that it's nice and out of the way, and there we go.
So there's several reasons why I prefer a Rapidbike module over a Power Commander. You can do fuel mapping and ignition mapping, and you can do the fuel mapping per cylinder and on some bikes per gear. It has an auto-tune feature which uses either the stock landers or a Rapidbike wideband lander, but we're using the stock landers. For some bikes there is a traction control and launch control option, but it's more of an engine spike control because it doesn't actually look at wheel speeds. So there is a status page so we can see what the bike's actually doing. And then there's a setup page where we can go and change engine braking control and actually calibrate the module. For some bikes there's even options for pit limiters. So it's a bit like a Power Commander, just cleverer.
So today we ventured all the way to North Lincolnshire to Barnet Vila Wold and Actiforce Racing to get the little 660 on the dyno. So we've got a few different little bits to try, and we just want to get the bike mapped as well and see what we've won. So I've just completed the first batch of runs, so this is standard bell mouths, the baffle in the arrow system and everything pretty much standard apart from the Rapidbike module, and we've got 93.4 horsepower, so that's pretty good. The fueling's nicely in range of where we want it down there, so that's looking alright. So what we're going to do now is have a bit of a fiddle around and see if we can make some improvements. For the second batch of runs, we're trying with the baffle taken out. Now, according to the sort of dyno sheets from Arrow, it might give us a little bit of peak horsepower, but the bike actually works better with the baffle in the mid-range of places, so we're going to do a couple of runs with the baffle out, see what difference it makes in real life. So the baffle out run is the red line, the baffle in run was the blue line. So the red line is a little bit better, so it's a tiny bit better with the baffle out at peak, but loses a bit sort of down in the 6,000–7,000 RPM range, but it does go quite lean there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of fuel back in it and see if we can pick up the bit we've lost in the middle and still ideally hold the bit we've got at the top end. There is definitely an increase in volume. If we get an increase in power to go with it, it's actually worth running with the baffle out. This is the joys of fiddling around with these things. So while Pete's playing with fuel tables, I'll just get a wafted camera around. Right, so with the baffle out, our were correct. We get a tiny little increase at the top, but it never quite as good through the mid-range. But the next thing to try are these rather fancy looking Jetprime bell mouths. Now, they're different heights because the standard ones are different heights, and they've got this little sort of diverter splitter in the middle of them. And I mean, as with all the other Jetprime stuff we've had, the quality looks lovely. They're almost a little bit nice to bury inside an airbox where you'll never see them again. But we're going to fit those and see what difference those make, and then put the baffle back in and see what difference those make with the baffle in, so that we've tried, you know, every version of the bits we've got. So that's the bell mouths fitted. I've Loctited the bolts in because we certainly don't want those coming out, and so I would open the throttle, but it's fly-by-wire, you can't, but the diverter sort of sits in line with the throttle plate, so it actually helps the air guide over the throttle plate, which is a nice touch. So we'll put it back together, see if it makes any more power. So that's the first run with the Jetprime throttle body bell mouths in, if I get my words right, and we've lost a little bit down here, which coincides with this bit. The torque and the fueling's near enough the same, so that's similar area to where we were struggling to get the fueling right with the baffle out anyway, and we've lost a tiny bit there but gained a bit right at the top. So what we're going to do next is put the baffle back in and see if it cleans up this bit down here, and then decide whether we're going to keep running the bell mouths or not. So that's our dyno session for the day done. The maximum power figure we got was 94.6 horsepower, which is pretty good. So we're happy with that. We've tested the auto adaptivity thing, we've tested the exhaust with the baffle in and out, we've tested 2 different sets of bell mouths, and the bike's fit and healthy. Now we just really want to take it to a racetrack and actually ride around on it.
So I sat down and studied the graph to work out exactly what we had. For the best peak power of 94.85 brake horsepower and the best torque of 48.01 foot-pounds, you want the Jetprime throttle bodies. They are the best. But they do lose a little bit in places through the middle. With the baffle out, the bike is stronger towards the top of the rev range, but it loses a little bit again towards the bottom. So depending on the circuit and how you're going to ride, depends on the setup you'd run. For example, at TT, we'd want the bike to be stronger towards the top end of the rev range, where you're revving hard all the time. But somewhere like Scarborough, where you're driving off slow corners very often, then you want the bike to actually drive off the bottom of the rev range better. So when it's time to actually go and ride the bike, I'm going to keep testing. So I'm going to take the bell mouths with me and the baffle with me, and I'm going to try all the combinations and see if we can feel any real difference on track. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to look at some of the items we've fitted to the bike, check out obsessionengineering.co.uk and join us again next time where we'll be making some more progress on the little 660.